Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Nashville, which goes down this weekend, Saturday night, headlined by Cory Sandhagen and Rob Font. Just before we get into the breakdowns though, as always, there's going to be a Base AI recap from last weekend at UFC 291. A little bit lower from the straight pick prediction accuracy from Base AI, but all in all, we know there were some real good predictions, some real good numbers in there, and like I said, I'll be breaking that down and recapping that from the last event at UFC 291. That'll be on our YouTube channel under the Base AI specific playlist, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But straight into the breakdowns we go. This is a fun fight night in my opinion. I'm really looking forward to it. Headlining, we've got Cory Sandhagen versus Rob Font. Font obviously stepping in on short notice. It's supposed to have been Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov, which, to be honest with you, it's really disappointing that Nurmagomedov has pulled out of the fight. It was going to be a phenomenal fight and definitely a measuring stick for both fighters. Is Sandhagen really that number one contender, or is the hype on Umar Nurmagomedov serious and he's going to then surge towards a title fight? But unfortunately Nurmagomedov isn't in the fight. Rob Font steps in, and look, Rob Font's coming off a really good performance against Adrian Yanez, a performance where, you know, a fight where a lot of people wrote Rob Font off and, you know, said that Adrian Yanez was going to, you know, run through him, buzzsaw, and it just didn't play out like that. Of course, Yanez had his moments, but Rob Font again was able to go punch with Adrian Yanez, exchange in those boxing ranges, and eventually just ended up hurting Yanez before knocking him out. Now, this is where it's going to be a little bit different in this fight, because I do think stylistically, this is a fight that does favour Cory Sandhagen. It's a fight, in my opinion, that's going to be won and lost on the feet. So it's not as if stylistically we've got a clash between a striker and a wrestler, but where the stylistic clash is within the striking is Cory Sandhagen is very kickboxing heavy, whereas Rob Font's very boxing heavy. Now, with Sandhagen being tall, long, the more unorthodox fighter, moves in weird patterns, I do think he's going to cause problems for Font, because Font has got to not only slow Sandhagen down, but get his reads on him so he can cut off the angles, get inside that boxing range, and that's how Rob Font's going to find Sandhagen and land on him. But I just don't think that's going to be easy for Rob Font. I think Font's going to have to work overtime to be able to do that. I think Sandhagen's going to be able to use his kicking game a lot in this fight, and I think it's really going to suit him down to the ground doing that. Of course, Sandhagen will land his straight shots and, you know, his hooks as well, but from that striking perspective, I think Sandhagen's going to be more varied. He's got more variety to his striking, like I said, with the kicks, unorthodox angles, moves in and strikes in unorthodox ways as well, and just being able to not only put combinations together, but really start to rack up the volume. And the thing is, Rob Font does have good volume. He's a fighter that can put out 100 plus strikes, no problem at all. I'm just not sure how often he's going to be able to find Sandhagen to be able to touch him up and, you know, put his own combinations together with his hands. And, you know, Font can kick, but I just don't think it's a real solid part of his game. And I feel like if he does go to the kicking more with Sandhagen, I think he's going to leave himself open to be countered and open for Sandhagen to really find the target with Rob Font. I just feel Rob Font is a solid fighter, real good boxer, one of the best boxers in the UFC in my opinion from a technical standpoint, but in this specific fight, I think it's a fight stylistically that favours Sandhagen, who's going to be better at more ranges. He's going to be able to move on the outside. It's a bigger cage as well. Obviously, we're not at the apex with the small cage, so it's more room for Sandhagen to work. And yeah, I just feel like it's going to be difficult for Rob Font to really pull away in this fight. And look, he might take a round or two throughout the fight, but I do think Sandhagen, it's his fight to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Cory Sandhagen to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, it's actually going to be a fun one, this fight, in my opinion. We've got Jessica Andrade versus Tatiana Suarez. Now, first of all, it's just really nice to see Tatiana Suarez fight twice in a single year, assuming that, of course, this fight goes ahead, which I hope it does. But yeah, it's nice to see Suarez get some consistency back in her competitive career. And Jessica Andrade, I feel like she's meeting Suarez at the wrong time, because Suarez, like I said, she fought earlier this year after the layoff, And I think Suarez is going to be a little bit more comfortable in this fight than what she was in the last fight from just the preparation and the whole ring rust scenario. So I think Suarez is in a real good spot in her career. Jessica Andrade on the flip side though, Andrade is lost back-to-back, and it's the first time that she's lost back-to-back fights since she lost her belt to Zhang Weili. Obviously, she was knocked out early in that fight, and then she lost to Rose Namajunas the fight after. So Andrade, also, when you look at those last two fights that she's lost, she was knocked out in round 1 against Yan Xiaonan. The fight before that, she was getting pieced up on the feet by the wrestler and grappler in Blanchfield, and then Blanchfield got the takedown and then submitted her pretty quickly. So it really does seem like Andrade is on a negative trajectory right now, and like I said, I feel like from Suarez's perspective, she's meeting Andrade at the right time, because if this had been a couple of fights prior, I feel there'd have been more hype on this fight. I don't think the line would have been as wide. I think people would have been betting Andrade, thinking that she's going to be able to go in there and light Suarez up, defend the takedowns or get back up, but after we've seen the last couple of fights, she was outstruck by, like I've said, the wrestler and grappler in Blanchfield. She was then knocked out by Yan Xiaonan early in that first round in a last fight. So, look, from a striking perspective in this fight, I still think Andrade might be the better striker, but I can't be confident in saying that because I thought she would absolutely be the better striker against someone like Blanchfield, and Suarez maybe arguably has got better striking than Blanchfield. So it's hard to really judge the striking, but where I feel like this fight is going to be won and lost is within that wrestling and grappling. There is holes there for Andrade. You can see that because when Blanchfield took her down, she sliced through her like butter, got a quick submission. In Tatiana Suarez's wrestling, we know how good that is. She's a solid wrestler, probably the best in the division. Her topside grappling is also solid. She doesn't rush position to position. She won't transition unless she knows she's going to be able to successfully complete the next position within that transition. And she can lay heavy on top. She can look for submissions. She can land ground and pound. I just feel that, like I said, it's not a really good fight for Andrade at this moment in her career, considering how Andrade has looked in the last two fights. And I think that Suarez, like I said, she'll be at the very, very least minimum requirement. Suarez will be competitive with the striking, but once the wrestling and grappling starts, I think that she's going to cause Andrade real problems. And for Andrade to win this fight, I feel that what she's got to do is just, when Suarez is coming into range, just put hard combinations together, look to try and light her up a little bit on the feet and try and make Suarez a little bit hesitant or make her struggle to really find good entries into the takedowns. But like I said, it's really hard to envisage that happening after what we've seen from the last couple of fights. And Suarez, I think, will be able to be competitive enough striking in order to be able to find the entries into the level changes. And yeah, I think unless Andrade really does tag or hit Suarez with something hard early, rocks her, changes the course of the fight, or of course knocks her out, I do think Suarez grows into this fight. And the longer it goes on, I think the more dominant she'll be. So I'm picking Tatiana Suarez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Dustin Jacoby versus Kennedy Nzechukwu. Kennedy Nzechukwu is very surprising, or has been lately. He looks like he's improving in all aspects of MMA. Now with Dustin Jacoby, you go back and watch that last fight against Mirzakhanov, I kind of feel that he only really and truly lost that fight because of the knockdowns. I think outside of that, he was looking good, he was landing, he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. It's just Mirzakhanov just hits like a truck, and Jacoby got caught a couple of times in those first two rounds. That swayed the rounds to Mirzakhanov. Jacoby won the last round, and yeah, I think that although it wasn't a great loss for Jacoby, I do feel that it wasn't a performance where he got completely ran through. And with Kennedy Nzechukwu, he's not going to provide that same level of threat as what Mirzakhanov did. So I do think Nzechukwu is going to be slightly harder to hit for Jacoby. But because Nzechukwu is so tall and long, one of Jacoby's best weapons is the low kick. So I kind of feel that the low kick's going to be available for Jacoby. I think he will be able to eat at that lead leg of Nzechukwu. And the one thing Jacoby won't do, in my opinion, that other Nzechukwu opponents have done in his fights is, I don't think he's going to overexert himself to the point where he gasses himself out. And like I said, the Homer Simpson effect where, the opponent comes in, tries to land everything and finish Nzechukwu, doesn't, and then Nzechukwu takes over with the gassed out and tired opponent. That's not Dustin Jacoby. I think Jacoby will be in here for a solid 3 rounds. And look, I feel like Nzechukwu is going to be able to do some good work in this fight. Of course he is. He's going to land on Jacoby. I think he's got better volume, but I'm just not sure that Nzechukwu is going to provide the threat and the power that's going to prevent Jacoby from constantly coming forwards. And maybe the wrestling might be there for Nzechukwu. But again, I don't think Jacoby's got bad wrestling defense. If he is taken down, he can get back up to his feet. And I don't think Nzechukwu's leveled up to that extent where he's going to be able to make this fight won and lost with the wrestling and grappling should the striking not be going his way. Ultimately, I think it's a close and competitive fight because Nzechukwu will have his moments. I think he lands more volume, and I think Jacoby's going to have a harder time to physically punch Nzechukwu because of the height and the reach and the range. And obviously Jacoby's going to have to be working a little bit of overtime in regards to closing the distance, but because the leg kick's there, the leg kick's going to be an option that could slow Nzechukwu down, which will help Jacoby close the distance, will make it not as hard, will make Jacoby not have to work as much. So maybe the longer the fight goes on, the easier it gets for Jacoby, but ultimately I think it is going to be close. I think Nzechukwu can at least take a round. I think Jacoby could take a couple of rounds. So it's going to be one of these back and forth striking fights where it's very calculated, very technical. But I do think Jacoby's the better technical striker. And considering that's where I believe the fight's going to be won and lost, I'm picking Dustin Jacoby to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight I'm hoping for fireworks in, to be honest. We've got Gavin Tucker versus Diego Lopes. Now, Diego Lopes was the one, if you remember, that stepped in on short notice to fight Movsar Evloev, who is an absolute Russian beast, unbeaten, 17-0. And Lopes steps in there, makes his UFC debut on short notice. And man, he looked as good as you're ever going to look against somebody like Evloev. Diego Lopes hurt Evloev early on. He didn't get a knockdown, but he definitely hit him hard, rocked him, and he had multiple submission attempts, a couple of them that were relatively close. The knee bar at the end of the fight, I feel it was really close. There was an arm bar that was really close as well. And Diego Lopes, I feel, just impressed every single person that watched that fight because nobody expected Lopes to be that competitive against Evloev. And like I said, there was moments where, you know, if Evloev had tapped, I don't think anyone would have blamed him or said that he was looking for a way out or anything. So Lopes is definitely a fighter to keep an eye on. Now, from Lopes's background, it is jiu-jitsu. He's got real solid jiu-jitsu, legit BJJ black belt. And of course we see that, you know, you saw it against Evloev. If you go back and look through Lopes's tape as well, you're going to see that there as well. But Lopes has also got some good striking. He's got powerful straight punches. Of course, that's what rocked Evloev, but he's had knockdowns and knockouts in previous fights. He's got a good split between the submissions and the knockouts as well. And he's just a very big, thick fighter for the division, athletic, and he's going to cause a lot of fighters problems, and especially with Gavin Tucker in this fight. Look, Tucker's a good fighter. He's got decent wrestling, good striking. He's got good jiu-jitsu himself, so it's going to be a competitive fight, and this is why I said I feel like I'm expecting fireworks in this fight because I think the striking exchanges are going to be super fun. I think the wrestling exchanges are going to be fun. I think the scrambling is going to be fun. And ultimately, like I say, I just think all in all, it's going to be really entertaining. The one question mark I've got is I feel like Gavin Tucker's best aspect of MMA is within his wrestling. Like he does have good wrestling, good takedowns. If he doesn't get the initial takedown, he'll back his opponent up to the cage. He'll look to chain wrestle, and he does normally do a good job of eventually getting his opponent down to the mat. It's just, if he gets Diego Lopes down to the mat, I'm pretty sure Tucker's going to trust his Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but Lopes's jiu-jitsu looks to be better and he's more dangerous. And I feel like if he's having these moments against Movsar Evloev, who is a very heavy topside pressure grappler, then he's going to have moments against Tucker. And those moments, I don't think Tucker will tough out like Evloev did. So I've got question marks of whether Tucker will take Lopes down because of the jiu-jitsu. Does Tucker think that his best path to victory is to get inside a boxing range and try and box Lopes up opposed to trying to take him down? And maybe that might be his way of thinking, and he might think his path of least resistance is there. But if that's the case, I think Tucker's missing a real big part of his MMA game because wrestling makes him the fighter that he is. I just feel stylistically with Diego Lopes, where he's really strong could make Tucker very hesitant in where Tucker's strongest as well. And even when we are looking at the striking, I don't think Tucker's going to be able to get inside of boxing range and just piece Lopes up. Like, Lopes is a good striker himself, really powerful. Lopes is going to be taller, he's going to be longer, bigger reach, bigger leg reach. He's going to be thicker in there as well. He's also younger, 28 years old compared to Tucker being 37. Tucker's also had a couple of years layoff from the big knockout loss by Dan Ige. And Tucker's also been plagued with some injuries as well. So I kind of feel when you're looking at the upside of this fight, there's just a lot of upside on Lopes. Now, like I said, the fact that Tucker is Gavin Tucker is going to make this fight much closer than what maybe another opponent would be, because Tucker is game. Like I said, his wrestling is good, his jiu-jitsu is good, his striking's good. I'm just expecting a real fun fight. But when it comes to a prediction and picking a winner, I think Lopes is the slightly better grappler. I think he's going to be the fighter that's got more power in this fight. Younger, more athletic, bigger, longer, and, hasn't been plagued by injuries. So, yeah, a fun fight, definitely at our hands here. I cannot wait for this fight. It's probably the fight I'm most looking forward to. But for the sake of a prediction, I'm picking Diego Lopes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tana Boser versus Aleksa Camur. Now, it's an interesting fight. Without sounding too disrespectful, neither fighter is a fighter that I've been overly impressed with, if I'm being honest. Like, Tana Boser's had some good moments for sure. Moments that I don't think Aleksa Camur has had since he came to the UFC, which feels like was years ago at this point. And obviously he's not been active. Don't know whether he's had some injury issues or whatever, but Aleksa Camur, like I say, out of the two, neither have really impressed me, but Camur definitely has impressed me much less than what Boser had. At least Boser has had some real good moments in the UFC, but I'm not sure what Camur's going to bring to the cage here, because he is still young. He's only 27, working with Stipe Miocic, which I kind of feel like that might have played a big factor in why he was called up to the Contender Series. And, Miocic made a real big deal to Dana White. And bear in mind, at the time, Miocic was the UFC champion, had broken the record for the most title defenses in the UFC heavyweight division. So I do think Miocic was a little bit in Dana's ear. Oh, this kid's special, you need to keep an eye on him, and maybe oversold it. But like I said, Camur's 27. He is going to be improving. He is going to be making developments. Fighters normally hit the prime at around 28, 29. So I do expect to see a better version of Camur, but I've not seen anything that in tape previously that makes me confident in picking him in this fight. Now, Tana Boser, I do feel that the move down in weight is probably the good move for him. He didn't really have a chance to really show us in his last fight against Kutalaba, who finished the fight relatively early. So Boser, I think, is going to have this fight to really show what changes he's made and how good he looks at light heavyweight. And I do think that even when it comes down to a volume perspective, Boser is relatively low volume. I think Camur's worse. I think Boser will be able to land on Camur. I think he'll probably be a little bit thicker, a little bit stronger, more physical. And for Camur to win this fight, I think he's got to keep Boser at the end of, his punches, his straight punches, and just chip away at him. But Boser really does come forward, get into the face of your opponent. I think he's got wrestling in his back pocket should he want to go with it. I don't think it's the best wrestling, but is it going to be enough at this level against someone like Aleksa Camur? It might be. So, yeah, it's a fight that's going to be really interesting. I think the UFC are going to have eyes on it, if you know what I mean by that. And, yeah, look, from a prediction perspective, I'm picking Tana Boser to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ignacio Bahamondes versus Ludovic Klein. And I think this is a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. Both fighters do have some wrestling, they do have some grappling. Of course, you don't get to this level in the UFC and win fights, multiple fights in the UFC, if you aren't somewhat well-rounded. But for the most part, Bahamondes is a striker, Ludovic Klein's a striker. So both fighters will meet in the middle. I think this is a good fight for Bahamondes, if I'm being honest. Look, again, I don't mean any disrespect, but the way Klein looked last time out against Jai Herbert, who I think Jai is past his prime at this point. And I don't mean Jai Herbert's declining or looking terrible or anything like that. I'm just saying, look, I think Jai Herbert is past his prime. And he beat Ludovic Klein in that fight. It was a very soft point deduction from the referee, deducting a point from Jai Herbert. Really, really soft. Herbert should have won that fight. But Klein just really didn't look in that fight too often. And I thought it was a really good performance by Jai Herbert. So if that's the level that Klein's fighting at right now, when you've got Bahamondes in there, who's got a very similar style to Jai Herbert, also tall, also long, but younger, dangerous as well, I do think that Klein's going to have a lot of problems. Now, the only thing that makes me pause for concern here, and especially regarding the betting line as well, is Klein can show up in some fights. Like, look at that Mason Jones fight. Like, Mason Jones is still a great fighter. And yes, you might be able to put it down to an off night for Mason Jones, but Klein can still have a performance. And Bahamondes is one of those fighters that hasn't truly been tested yet. And could this be the fight that he does get tested? Because Klein is a confident striker, a technical striker. It's just some of Klein's weapons, especially with the head kick, with Bahamondes being tall and long, I think Klein's going to struggle with. So all I'm saying is the pause for concern is that Klein does still have a technical striking game, regardless of recent performances, and he can still pull out a shock victory like he did against Mason Jones. Could this be another one of those fights? But I can only analyse what I'm seeing from both fighters, and I can't assume that Ludovic Klein's going to have another exceptional performance to the point where he does win this fight, in a fight where technically and stylistically, from a striking stylistic perspective, he should be losing. It's tough. I think Bahamondes is going to do good work, land volume, land powerful strikes, mix things up well with the kicks and with the punches, and I also think he's going to be better in more ranges, from a boxing range out to kicking range as well. Even inside the clinch, if he's taller and longer, he should have success there as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ignacio Bahamondes to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be absolutely wild. We've got Billy Quarantillo versus Damon Jackson, and like I said, it's going to be wild. Billy Quarantillo, we know what we get from him. He's forward pressure, he's aggressive, he's durable, he'll try and outlast his opponents. Again, similar to what I said with Nzechukwu, with the Homer Simpson effect. A lot of fighters will come on strong early against Quarantillo, hurt him, try to finish him, but the durability does stand, not be able to get him out, and then Quarantillo, like a zombie, just comes forward and just breaks his opponent, takes over, and either gets the late finish or a solid decision. So that's the way Quarantillo fights. Now with Damon Jackson, I don't think has bad cardio. I don't think he has a bad gas tank. I think he can fight at a high pace and keep the cardio good as well. Jackson's striking's not very technical, but he strikes straight punches and with power. Now with Billy Quarantillo, I don't think he's that technical either from a striking perspective, but he comes forward and he'll wing big hooks and he'll look to try and land hard and hurt you. So when you've got your two differences in your striking here, you've got your big hooks from Quarantillo, not very technical, and then you've got your big straight punches from Jackson, not very technical. Well, the straight punches will land before the hook. So I kind of feel like Jackson's going to be able to land on Quarantillo. And then when you come to the wrestling and grappling, Billy Quarantillo's wrestling is decent, but I like Damon Jackson's wrestling as well. And Quarantillo can be taken down. He's been taken down in most of his fights in the UFC. So I think Jackson will be able to get him down to the mat. Now, what normally saves Quarantillo against other opponents is the fact that he is a good BJJ player. He's got good scrambles and can get back up to his feet. But the thing is with Damon Jackson in this fight is going to be the better grappler. His scrambles are insanely good, insanely fast. His positioning is excellent. He's got a magnet for that top position. So in this fight, I actually think that Damon Jackson's got a good fight ahead of him stylistically, because from a striking perspective, unless Jackson is caught by one of the big hooks and knocked out, which is a possibility, the chin is a bit of a question mark. Not that there's huge durability issues, it's just Jackson has been knocked out badly before. But Quarantillo's also coming off that knockout against Boser only a few months ago. So is Quarantillo fully recovered and chin fully repaired from that knockout from Boser? So from a striking perspective, Jackson probably could get the better of Quarantillo, but where this fight is won and lost, I think is going to be in the wrestling and grappling. I think Damon Jackson might have issues early on, both wrestling and grappling, with Quarantillo defending, but the longer the fight goes on, I think Jackson will be able to come on strong. I do think Quarantillo tires, and the more takedowns that Jackson gets, the more it'll start defeating Quarantillo mentally, and the more Jackson will have success the longer the fight goes. So yeah, look, I think Quarantillo is a great fighter, but I just don't think Jackson is a fighter that Quarantillo's going to break with the pressure. And I think Jackson's the better fighter in where I think the fight's going to have some big moments playing out, which is within that wrestling and grappling, and obviously the grappling being on the mat with the submission attempts and top position. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Damon Jackson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Raoni Barcelos versus Kyler Phillips. Kyler Phillips, of course, coming back after the suspension from USADA, I believe. So, yeah, it's good to see him back. I've always been a fan of Kyler Phillips. I cashed him as an underdog against Song Yadong, and I just love the way he fights. He's a really talented fighter as well. The one question mark with Kyler Phillips, and, we're coming back onto that gas tank and cardio conversation, is the gas tank and cardio. Like Kyler Phillips, he's got big action strikes. Not everything, but most of his strikes are big action, either thrown with power or spinning wheel kicks, and even just down to his movement. So even take away the strikes, his movement, he just moves so much early in the fights, and he just can't sustain that type of movement, that type of pressure, and those types of crazy strikes all combined for 3 rounds. And it's not his fault. It's just like every fight is human, and when you've got that much movement and you're packing that much power and you throw in the crazy, wild, flashy attacks, eventually it's going to get to your gas tank and cardio. And when Kyler Phillips, or if Kyler Phillips doesn't do that in this fight, then he's not going to be fighting the way that Kyler Phillips likes to fight, that makes him the talented fighter that he is right now. Now, I might be overselling the cardio and gas tank issue, but he definitely slows down from round 2. And he doesn't gas out to the point where his hands are on his hips and he's huffing and puffing and he physically can't stand up or move, but he significantly slows down. Now, with Raoni Barcelos, I think that Barcelos, for him to win this fight, is going to have to weather that early storm, because Kyler Phillips is insanely good in that first round. Barcelos has got to weather that storm, and if he does, then he might be able to take over the fight the longer it goes on. Now, if Phillips doesn't come out fast and hard, and he does fight more, or with more fight IQ, and slows things down a little bit and fights smarter, then I just think he's going to be going toe-to-toe with a Raoni Barcelos, who is a technically brilliant fighter. The only question mark with Barcelos is, look, he was knocked out badly last time out. However, to counter that, it was against Umar Nurmagomedov. It wasn't the first punch that knocked Barcelos out. Barcelos took a few hard punches before that, before the one that landed clean. And that was also the first time Barcelos has ever been finished by KO TKO in his career. So how much stock he can put into that durability of Barcelos is tough. Would it surprise me if, because he is getting up there in age, would it surprise me if Kyler Phillips knocked him out in this fight and we saw a repeat of the bad knockout? No, it wouldn't. But I do think that Barcelos has got the technical abilities to really deal with that storm in round 1 of Phillips. And I think Barcelos could get through that with his technical abilities, maybe even mixing some takedowns himself. He's a multi-time Brazilian national wrestling champion. He's a BJJ black belt. So I don't think Phillips is going to be able to have the success wrestling and grappling Barcelos in this fight as what he has done in previous fights. And from a striking perspective, I think Barcelos is good, technical, and got power himself. So I'm actually siding with Barcelos in this fight, because I don't think Phillips can do what he does in round 1 throughout the entire fight. Maybe he takes round 1 from Barcelos, but if he does and tires out, Barcelos could take over late in the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Raoni Barcelos to win this fight. In the next fight, this is fun as well. The entire fight card's fun. We've got Jeremiah Wells versus Carlston Harris. Both fighters are super fun. They're super skilled. They've got real good qualities about the game, and both fighters, I absolutely love watching them compete. And although it sucks that one has to lose in this fight, I actually think that it's a really well-matched fight, well put together, because Carlston Harris is going to be bigger, he's going to be taller, and he's going to be longer. And when Jeremiah Wells comes forward, he comes forward with explosive power combinations. But Carlston Harris, although he's not as explosive and is not as quick as Jeremiah Wells, he's got really good striking from the straight punch perspective. And as Wells is coming in, I think Carlston Harris can just throw things straight down the middle and he's going to be able to land on him. And we've seen what happens when you land on Wells. Last time out against Semmelsberger dropped him in at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. He might have dropped him in all 3, I can't remember, but he dropped him multiple times in that fight. But what won Wells the fight is the fact that he was in on the hips. He was able to pick him up and take him down. Wells is gifted physically. He's very athletic, he's very quick, he's very powerful, very explosive. He has got a seriously good BJJ game, very good positioning. He's very smart with the positioning as well. He knows when it's time to lay heavy and when it's time to transition. He's a dangerous submission artist as well. And I think this is where Wells could cause Harris problems, because Where Harris is going to get stuck in this fight is, like I've said, he's not going to be as athletic as Wells. He's not going to be as physically gifted. He's going to be at a speed disadvantage. So although Wells could get cracked by Harris in this fight, I do think that this is a good fight for Wells. The other thing that Wells is going to have to mind his P's and Q's in is when he's trying to pick Carlston Harris up and dump him on the mat, because Harris has got a very dangerous anaconda / dar / front choke. And once that's locked up, he will submit most fighters that are in there. It's going to be very difficult to get out of that tight pincer grip from Carlston Harris. So Wells has got to be careful that when he's shooting in, he doesn't leave his neck out. Otherwise, Carlston Harris is definitely going to win the fight, because I believe if Harris wraps up one of them, it's over. And that's how dangerous Harris is. But Jeremiah Wells, like I said, it's hard to look past him here when I think he's going to have the slight striking advantage because of the speed and the movement and the explosivity. He's physically gifted, he's more athletic, and I do think that if he does get top control time, he'll be able to be the better grappler when the fight hits the mat as well. So Wells has got to be careful of like I said, the hard straight punches down the middle as he's coming in and the front chokes of Harris. But aside from that, I feel like everything else stacks up for Wells. I'm picking Jeremiah Wells to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jake Hadley versus Cody Durden. Cody Durden stepping in on short notice for Tagir Ulanbekov. And look, Jake Hadley didn't have an easy fight with Tagir Ulanbekov ahead of this weekend, and I think Cody Durden is an amazing step in as well. And I think that Jake Hadley's got the same but a different problem on his hands, if that makes sense. So obviously Cody Durden is a slightly different fighter to Ulanbekov, but the one thing that is going to stand in Jake Hadley's favour here is, of course, he will have been training for the wrestling of Ulanbekov, and this is where Cody Durden's best as well. So from a fight camp training for a fighter-specific perspective, not too much has changed for Jake Hadley. Now, from this fight's perspective, from the striking side of things, I think that Jake Hadley's more varied. He uses kicks a little bit more than what Cody Durden does. Durden does have boxing experience, so his hands are more preferred from the striking side, from Durden's side of it. So I think that when these fighters, both Durden and Hadley, get into boxing exchanges, I think Durden's going to be better. I think his hands are slightly heavier as well. But out at kicking range, I think Hadley is going to have more success. I just feel that Hadley kicks a little bit better. And also, I think it'll serve Hadley well trying to kick to the body of Durden. But again, stylistically in this fight, I think that Hadley has a lot of success when he fights a conventional orthodox stance fighter, but Durden's going to be southpaw as well. So against a conventional orthodox stance fighter, Hadley can fire those kicks to the open body, but they're not going to be as available in this fight to Durden because they're going to be fighting in the same stance. So from Hadley's perspective, maybe the kicking side of it is not going to be as great as it has been in previous fights, and that would be a detriment to his game. But from Durden's perspective, look, Durden's got this real relentless wrestling, and in his first couple of fights in the UFC, I did question the gas tank and cardio, but I kind of feel like it's something Durden's worked on and is improving from fight to fight. And last fight out against Charles Johnson, by the way, who was known for having good wrestling defense and a good get-up game, Durden took him down 11 times. And of course, he slowed down towards the end of the fight. It's only natural, but he didn't slow down to the point he wasn't shooting takedowns. In fact, the first 3 or 4 takedowns were defended in round 3 from Charles Johnson, but he still managed to get a couple more after that. He still kept on it, he still stuck to the game plan, and he still kept relentless. And I think Hadley could have problems with this pressure, with the wrestling pressure and relentlessness from Durden in this fight. If it's a striking battle and Hadley's got time to wrestle himself, he might have some success against Durden, but I just don't think Durden's going to give him the breathing room that Hadley needs in this fight to be comfortable, and I think that Durden will look good because of that. The only concern that I've got from Durden's perspective is when he does lose, he has lost by submission, and Jake Hadley, I think, is the better grappler here, definitely the bigger submission threat. Off his back, he's got good triangles, he's got good arm bars. You know, if he wraps up a guillotine, these are all things that Durden's had issues with previously. So as long as Durden minds his P's and Q's from not getting caught in something from a takedown, I actually think Durden's going to look really good in this fight. And sure, it's a threat and a worry from the submission perspective, but outside of that, I think the striking's even, but the wrestling, the relentless wrestling and the pressure wrestling that Durden puts on his opponents, I'm not sure that Hadley's going to look great over 3 rounds having to deal with that. I think Hadley will have his moments for sure, but I do think Durden is going to go to the wrestling, and he's on a 3-fight winning streak, especially in his last 2 fights due to the wrestling. I think he'll keep at that. And like I say, outside of a submission from Hadley, I think Durden's going to be a little bit overwhelming for Hadley. So for those reasons, I'm picking Cody Durden to win this fight. And finally, we've got Ode Osbourne versus Asu Almabaev. Almabaev making his UFC debut. I'm sure you can guess with his surname of what he likes to do in the cage. He is predominantly a wrestler, and he does look like he has good wrestling, especially off the single leg, and then he can get his opponent down. His topside grappling's a little hit and miss. Sometimes he can look great, but he can leave openings for his opponents to stand back up to the feet, which is not normally an issue for Almabaev because, like I say, he'll get a hold of another takedown and get his opponent back down to the mat. So it definitely appears that the wrestling is the strongest aspect of Almabaev's MMA game, and Osbourne's got to deal with that. Now, Osbourne does have a background in wrestling. He doesn't really use it from an offensive perspective, but he's very good at defending takedowns, and it's difficult to take Osbourne down. I mean, he has been taken down, and I'm sure Almabaev will score a couple of takedowns in this fight, but the other side to it is Osbourne's grappling's also decent off his back. And yes, he has been caught in a couple of submissions, but outside of that, Almabaev's going to have to take Osbourne down, which is tough, and then he's going to have to keep him down, which again is tough. Then on the feet striking, I just don't think Almabaev's in the same league as Osbourne. I think Osbourne's leveling up from a striking perspective. He's working, I believe, with Extreme Couture, Syndicate MMA. He's on that Vegas scene with Dewey Cooper as well, good training partners such as Amir Albazi. So although Ode Osbourne isn't a super young athlete, he's still relatively new within MMA, so he's still going to be making developments. And I think from a striking perspective here, I think he's going to cause Almabaev a lot of problems. Almabaev's going to have to get his wrestling going and often. And I think, like I've already said, Almabaev will score a couple of takedowns, but does he do work on top of Osbourne? I'm not too sure. Does Osbourne make him work hard? And is this one going to be one of those fights that's going to be much closer than we anticipate? I mean, look at Azat Maksum a couple of weeks ago against Tyson Nam. You know, Maksum looked absolutely insane with his wrestling, with the speed of his entries into the takedowns, and he hardly shot a takedown. He did score 2 takedowns, but not too much work from a topside grappling perspective, and for the most part it was just a striking fight and went to a split decision. So is Almabaev going to have these same issues against somebody like Osbourne, finally stepping up in competition, nice big record, finally fighting in the UFC, and is he going to get a little bit stuck? And from the striking side, I think Osbourne's really going to put it on Almabaev. I think Osbourne, for the most part, will be able to stuff some takedowns. If he is taken down, get back up to his feet. And if this fight is made by Osbourne to be won and lost on the feet striking, then I think Osbourne takes it. And I do think that that's an absolute possibility. I'm not sold that Almabaev is as good of a wrestler as he has been outside the UFC, in the UFC. I don't think we'll know that for sure until we've seen this fight against Osbourne. Definitely, like I said, I'm throwing comparisons back again to Maksum a couple of weeks ago. Maksum, great outside the UFC. As soon as he fought a UFC level opponent, it just wasn't as easy, and he had to really scrape a decision. Some people thought Tyson Nam won that fight, and I think Almabaev could potentially have the same problems here. And unless he is an absolute beast wrestler and he can get hold of that single leg and take Osbourne down and keep him down, I'm just not convinced until I see it. So for those reasons, from a pick prediction perspective, I'm picking Ode Osbourne to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I genuinely am looking forward to this fight night. I think it is going to be a really fun and entertaining night. And as always, to everybody tuning in, whether it's on the YouTube platform or one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, and all the rest, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for showing your support. If you are on YouTube, drop a comment. Let me know who you're picking. Let me know if you disagree with a pick, if you're betting. I hope you beat the bookies, unless you're on the opposite side of one of my bets, then as always, I hope you lose. But no, all seriousness, thank you for showing your support. Like, subscribe, share the video to your friends on your social media if you've really enjoyed the breakdowns, or if I've ever helped you win a bet with the analysis. Any exposure is always great for us, so I appreciate it as always. We'll be back again next week for the next UFC event. I'm Newsome, and I'll see you again next week.